You use this, I can't remember if you coined it or if you cite someone else, but the idea of being middle class in spirit. So as we struggle with being turned in on ourselves and needing the gospel, needing to transform us, to have this outwardness, this outward-facedness, you talk about the difference between being middle class in spirit and being poor in spirit. Talk a little bit about what you mean by middle class in spirit and how that affects one's view of those who are materially poor around them. If you're middle class in spirit, you're going to have a certain view of those materially poor around you.
Yeah, I just meant most middle class people, rightly so, work hard for what they get. Mm-hmm. Very often poor people aren't even, listen, I think at one end of the spectrum, very often poor people give up. I mean, they know if they work, they're going to get minimum wage, and they can't even pay their rent, and they just give up. They don't have the skills. They give up. And there are, obviously, it's possible to be wealthy and not work because you have the money. That's not usually true of first generation wealth, but second and third generation wealth. You know, you give kids too much money, and then they don't know what they want to do. And middle class people are the hard workers, and they've earned what they get. And I'm afraid middle class and spirit are basically legalists. Spiritually speaking, these are people who say, yes, God loves me, and I deserve it because I've worked very hard. I read the Bible, and I pray, and I'm keeping the Ten Commandments, and I'm trying my best, and He owes me a good life. That's middle class and spirit. And that's in the book. That's my idea. And what that means then, of course, is if you're spiritually middle class, you have a tendency to look down on poor people and say, what's their problem? Look at me. To be poor in spirit means I know I'm saved by grace, and I've only been saved by an act of God's intervention. And I actually am bankrupt spiritually. And by His sheer mercy and grace, He's come down and saved me. And He spent Himself, He emptied Himself in order to save me. That's got to affect the way in which you look at the poor. It just has to. You look at a poor person and you say, why didn't you pull yourself up by your bootstraps? And of course, if God said that to you, you'd be dead spiritually. And you say, well, if I do give that person my charity and grace, then what if they abuse it? But of course, that's happened to you. God's given you grace and charity, and you've trampled on it because you haven't lived the life you should live. So the more you see yourself as spiritually poor and the recipient of God's wonderful grace, the more your heart's going to go out to the poor. And when you look at the materially poor, in a sense, you're looking in a mirror. And that's my whole point, is that just generally speaking, you see in the Bible that if you're poor in spirit, you care about the poor, in materially poor. And if you're middle class in spirit, you don't care about the materially poor.